I'm going to tell you two things that I sincerely believe. The first is that there's no way Joe Biden is going to be the Democratic nominee in 2024. And the second is that there's no way that anybody but Joe Biden is going to be the Democratic nominee in 2024. If it sounds like I'm suffering from sudden onset multiple personality disorder, maybe, but I'm just following the news cycle that is, it's moving around more than two fat kids on a seesaw mounted to a trampoline inside one of those bouncy houses. It's just, it's all over the place. On the negative side, let's do the negative side first. Biden has as an incumbent, as a serious primary challenger in the form of one RFK Jr., never a good sign for an incumbent. Just ask LBJ or Jimmy Carter for that matter. He's got a lousy approval rating. There's a new poll showing that 56% of Americans believe that it's likely that he's accepted bribes from foreign powers. There's Hunter Biden, the shunned seventh grandchild, all of this stuff that just says there's no way that the Democrats can stick with this guy in 2024. In fact, Bill, a couple of writers I respect, one of my colleagues at PJ Media, Jeff Reynolds, and Deb Philman, I can't remember where she writes anymore, but she used to be at PJ. They say that the new nominee is going to be none other than your governor, Gavin Newsom. Deb wrote, "Mark my words, this is the plan. Replace Biden with the shinier, less senile version of Bond villain. If I had to predict right now, Newsom will be the nominee, not Biden. In fact, Biden will likely pass the baton directly to the guy rather than run." Do you see Governor Hair Jill being at the top of the ticket?
It's a possibility. I mean, Joe Biden's just a dropped ice cream cone away from being out of the race, and so nobody really knows what's going to happen there. Whether it's Biden or Newsom, I remember when, shortly after the election in 2016, when Donald Trump won, I don't really actually remember the precise dynamics of it, but it was something to the effect of that Trump was the only person who could have beaten Clinton, and Trump could not have beaten anybody else. Something along those lines, right? And that's the first thing I got when you started talking about this, both with Biden and with Newsom. This is where Donald Trump is at his absolute best in terms of his political effectiveness, because he's not afraid to go there. He has, in the last several days especially, said, how did the cocaine get to the White House? Well, let's start with Hunter Biden. He just goes there. And Trump will be able to take Biden's record and Newsom's record to astonishing heights. That's the kind of opponent that Republicans should want, because unless the sweet meteor of death intervenes, Donald Trump's going to be the Republican nominee, and Donald Trump is at his best when he has something to sink his teeth into in terms of his remarkable skill at invective and his willingness to get into that fight, his willingness to talk about things that everybody knows is true. Trump has not been shy about Biden's mental condition. And while he hasn't had too much interactions with Newsom, he'll certainly be able to say, well, when I was president, we had the greatest economy in the world. Here's what Newsom did to California, and before that, he did this to San Francisco. He won't be Gentleman Jim with either one of these two. Yeah. But if it turns out that it's Trump versus Biden, it's going to be personal. And I personally think that this is, as I said, I think this presents Donald Trump an opportunity to be at his most, I almost said at his best, I'll stay with that too, at his best, but also at his most politically effective. When he is criticizing somebody who has a lot to be criticized about, he doesn't beat around the bush about it. He goes straight for the jugular. And it's a pretty broad jugular in the case of both of these candidates, but I think especially with Biden.
And Bill, you made me flash on something. I remember that pivotal moment in the 2016 race. I believe it was during one of the debates where Trump looks at Hillary Clinton and just says, "She's a nasty person, isn't she?" And
or he said, or that reply was says, "You be in jail," that kind of thing.
Yeah, just turn to Biden and say, "Man, you are a senile fraud, aren't you?" Just the emperor has no clothes. I would love to see that.
Me too.
Scott, my problem with this whole how do you get rid of Biden thing is there is no way that this guy lets go of power while there's still another dime to be squeezed out of the Treasury for him or his buddies or from his pals in Beijing. It's almost impossible to unseat a sitting president from your own party's ticket, especially when the backup is Kamala Harris. You got to get rid of her first, and that is basically impossible. So are we just wasting our time here with all of this talk, or is there's something inherent about our crazy political system that draws this out of us all the time?
Yeah, I'm afraid that's sad but true, the latter. As I agree that the only way that Biden gets out of this race is on wheels horizontal, and that I pray does not happen because I don't want bad things to happen to anybody, and Kamala Harris is in line. So not only does this
is everybody's nightmare. Yes.
Not only does my natural human compassion, reach out to Dr. Joe Biden and her husband, but it's like the consequences of that are even more severe. And I don't rule that out. I mean, it's not necessarily that the sitting president is completely out of the picture, but if he should just not be able to serve anymore or not be able to go on anymore, if he gets to a point for some reason with an injury or a sickness or whatever, that he can't do this, and his vice president steps in, then I think there's a really strong move in the party to say we need to carry on the legacy. Despite what we think from our side, our perspective, the Democrats, even though they don't think a whole lot of Joe Biden's personal popularity, do look at much of what has been accomplished during his administration as great triumphs, and they think that there's more to come, and they would like to have somebody who's more progressive like Kamala Harris in that chair. So I would guess that she, depending on the timing of everything, would then become the nominee. Gavin Newsom doesn't seem as strong a prospect to me as he may to others, but then I don't know him as well as Bill does. And then, Axios had a story today, as I'm saying this is Tuesday, about Joe Biden's penchant while in public to be seen as an affable, grandfatherly guy. In private, apparently, you're not considered to be part of the Biden staff until he shouted at you, usually with obscenities. Apparently, he's done a lot of kind of BS, GD, effing this, effing that, to the extent that his nickname among his staffers and former staffers is Old Yeller, because he is.
Well, you know what happened to Old Yeller?
Yeah, well, so he's constantly, he's got an explosive personality. Now, some people are saying, why don't we get more of that in public? Because people would really appreciate seeing that guy who's in for the fight.
No.
Glenn Reynolds, I think, commented, or maybe it was you, Steve Green, I don't know, but it was on instapundit.com, commented about how, perhaps that would be seen as another symptom of onset of dementia, that kind of meanness and anger and things like that. So, but I think Bill's right about Trump's ability to take on somebody like Joe Biden. I mean, the only guy in the primaries, the Republican primaries, who's willing to say boo to Donald Trump is Chris Christie, and everybody else is dancing around him, hoping to ingratiate themselves with his followers, not realizing that it doesn't matter whether you attack him or you don't attack him. He will attack you if you become a threat at all, and his supporters, those hardcore Trump supporters, are not yours anyway. What Christie's strategy is basically to understand that and go for the people who aren't necessarily hardcore Trump supporters, but would be Republicans or supporters of a conservative candidate. Trump doesn't have any internal threat in the Republican Party because nobody's willing to go after him, and he's showing himself as somebody, crass as he may be, willing to go after the other side. And there are a lot of people who say, hey, whatever it takes, let's take them down. So, yeah, I think, assuming Biden's good health, I think he winds up being the party's nominee. The only way I think that he doesn't is literally if he's not able to.
Yeah, Steve, I have a question for you on this. So let's just say, for the sake of this argument, that it's going to be either Biden or Newsom. That's just the premise that we're working with on this episode. What happens to Kamala Harris? Does she retain her vice presidential spot if Newsom is the nominee? No. I know they want to get rid of her like crazy. I know they want to get rid of her. There's no question they want to get rid of her. But can they afford to dump her?
They'll say you can't get a VP from California with a presidential candidate from California.
That's what they'll say. That's yes. How they'll get out of it.
Scott's right on that, and also
they'll make her Secretary of Education or something.
Great. I put her in charge of the DEA. The other thing about that Veep slot, if by some odd chance it is Gavin Newsom instead of Joe Biden, they'll have to replace Kamala Harris with another first this of this.
Absolutely, yes.
So it won't be another white guy, especially since they'd be replacing one white guy at the top of the ticket with another white guy at the top of the ticket. So they'll have to go with somebody who is not just female and of color, but also probably gay. Maybe it's Pete Buttigieg. I don't know, but it has to be another first this of that, and maybe the other thing. That said, Scott, it was that Axios piece you mentioned that made me realize I was developing multiple personality disorder or schizophrenia or something, because I read the headline of that piece and it sounded like it was going to be one of these hit pieces that we've seen coming out a little more frequently from the mainstream media on Biden. I'm like, oh, this could be meaty. And then I actually start reading the piece, and the spin was he's the unyielding executive who doesn't put up with briefs that aren't complete, and if it's not in there, right?
Yeah, he's an alpha male.
Yeah.
He's on top of the facts, and he grills all
his
subordinates. He grills them all, and if they don't have the facts, then he explodes at them.
Exactly.
And by the way, first comes the Alzheimer's, and then comes the dementia. And I've lived through this, and so have many other people. The Alzheimer's is heartbreaking. The dementia is soul destroying.
Yeah.
It's just ugly. It's ugly, and it's not the person. It's a mental illness, and it can make the kindest person into somebody really aggressive and nasty. And I've never thought that Joe Biden was particularly kind to begin with.
Well, yeah, and I would say that I'm continuing to say what I've said to you for years now, Bill, is I don't buy the fact that we're going to have a sudden revelation that he's got dementia or Alzheimer's. But in this story in Axios, they point out that this behavior on Biden's part goes way back. Like he's been a nasty SOB to his staff people for a long time.
And we've seen those outbursts in public from time to time, and he is a nasty piece of work, always has been. That said, you're still never going to convince me, even with this Axios report, that Joe Biden is like Phil Hartman playing Mastermind Ronald Reagan in that classic SNL sketch. Never going to happen. Let me wrap this up real quick. We don't know what's going to happen. Anybody who's making a prediction now about what the 2024 scene is going to look like, nobody knows. We've got a crazy political system, and all of this stuff has to play out, and all the players, large and small, are all just there are so many gears, there are so many pieces in motion, there will be so many crises and opportunities that'll change the math that nobody knows. All I know for sure is at this point, I want to get in the bouncy house with the fat kids and have a little fun and take a break. And that's your right angle on that, brought to you by the members of BillWhittle.com. For Bill Whittle and Scott Ott, I'm Steve Green. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.